Hello, everyone. I'm back with another episode of Off the Record. I'm your host, Aram Melkoumov. Thanks for tuning in. And I'm here today with Mike Evans, who's building a new company called Fixer. He went to MIT, from which he graduated with a pile of debt and co-founded GrubHub. That years later, he led through 5 financing rounds, a couple of acquisitions, a merger, and ultimately an IPO. Mike is also writing a book, Hangry, A Startup Journey, which is coming sometime in 2022. What a journey, Mike. Thanks for coming on our show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Happy to chat.
Awesome. So first question I have is about your book. So you're writing this book. It's called Hangry, A Startup Journey. So I want to ask, why hungry spelled with an A?
Yeah, it's actually angry spelled with an H.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's that feeling when like you've ordered delivery food and it's like an hour and 15 minutes and the food's not there yet, and your body just won't let you think about anything else and you're angry about it. And so I tried to solve that problem with GrubHub. I created this online ordering platform, signed up 50,000 restaurants, brought the company all the way through the IPO. And throughout that process, it's an emotional process, creating a startup, and going through all those steps, everything from signing up my first restaurant and getting thrown out of the first like 20 restaurants that I walked into, all the way through what it feels like to get wined and dined by investment bankers. It's not like an emotionally neutral experience. Like you put all of your energy and effort into it. And so there's ups and there's downs. And then as I was leaving the company, you kind of have to let it go and let it do its own thing. And so at that time I was pretty burnt out. I was pretty tired from all the time that I spent working, and really just spent a lot of time thinking about like what my legacy with that was and what I was going to do next. And it right at that time is when GrubHub was sort of pivoting into the gig economy model. Mm-hmm. And I was a little bit frustrated by it because I thought it was the wrong move, but I was also not my baby anymore. And so I had to let it go. And so that's what the book is about, letting go of the old, sort of thinking about the new, and really just being what it's like to have goals and to hit those goals, and then to have your goals change, and then to not hit some of those goals, and the emotional experience of going through that.
Interesting. And so why decide to write a book about it instead of like a big blog post, or what do you want to get out through the book?
Yeah, the point of the book is, if I had to sum it up in one line, it's be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. And how it's really important to set goals and to really understand for oneself, especially in the startup world, what it is you're trying to accomplish, because different people have different goals for you. And so investors will have different goals and employees have different goals. And so having a goal defined for oneself is really important. And so that's the message of the book, that sometimes you hit those and it's great, and sometimes you don't, and it can be really frustrating. But it's important to be explicit and intentional about it. And so I talk about this. I'm saying it to you right now on a podcast, right? I do write long blog posts about it. I tweet about it. I started a new company where this is the whole idea behind the company. And so this is the message I'm trying to put out in every channel possible. The book just is the one that really sort of is the fullest treatment of that idea. And that's why I wanted to get that message out to as many people as possible.
I think you touched upon some already with be careful what you wish for, and make really focus on your goals. But what are some of through the book or just through your other experiences, what are the 2 biggest lessons young first-time early stage founders can take away?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is I just said it. So know what it is you're trying to accomplish before you start putting your effort in. Right. And then, once that goal is set and you have a direction to start pulling, for the first time entrepreneur or second time entrepreneur or nth time entrepreneur, make revenue. It's just a hobby. It's just a hobby until you have customers. And there's nothing like a paying customer who's disappointed with your product, or a paying customer who's really satisfied, that is a motivator for change, that's entirely theoretical when you don't have customers. And so moving from the theoretical, from the hobby to the real and to the business, it should happen within the first hour of a business, ideally. Like you shouldn't take 6 months creating products before you release it out into the wild.
Okay. 100%. Revenue is key, right? With any kind of business, small or large. Before we get into your career journey, last time when we had a chance to connect, you said something really interesting, and I wanted to talk about it. You said you have to have the tenacity and grit and stay the course, but also the insight and flexibility to change your mind. I feel like this is a balance that is quite unique in every situation. I want to get your thoughts on that a bit more.
Yeah, there's no, like, if you were an investor and you were trying to test for that set of ideas, you couldn't, because it's so situational. And yet it is the fundamental paradox of, there's really two fundamental paradoxes of creating a startup. This is one of them. And it's this idea that, like, you're going out to the world and you're saying, hey world, something is wrong. It's not good, and I'm going to fix it. And I have an idea about how I'm going to fix it. And I'm right about it, and the entire world is wrong about it, which is an incredibly arrogant perspective, right? And yet, for the successful entrepreneur, they are correct when they say that. And so they go out into the world and they make a stamp. They try to make a stamp on it, right? That's what we do as entrepreneurs. And then, and the world always has the same response. You're wrong. We always do it this way. We've always ordered pizzas by phone. Like, why would you need to do this online? It's not that hard to pick up the phone. My position was, it is that hard to pick up a phone. It is really hard to pick up a phone compared to using, at the time it was an app, and then eventually became mobile, but that came later. And so the world comes back and tells you you're wrong, right? And so the tenacity is, the staying the course is this idea of, like, well, no, I am right, and I am going to make this work, and I am going to create online ordering and change an industry with it. And so that was the tenacity, right? So then fast forward a few years, and one of my board members is like, don't you think you should be able to order? Like, I've got this flip phone, and I do a lot of texting with it. It wasn't a smartphone; it was just like a Nokia flip phone that they had, or wasn't even a BlackBerry at that point. And this board member, Steve Miller, said, maybe you should be able to order by text. And I said, no one will ever order a pizza on a mobile phone. You're crazy. Like, that'll never happen. It's just computers. And then very quickly after that, it was maybe like 3 or 4 months after that, I was like, you know what? I'm wrong. Like, I'm wrong. People are going to order by phone. Like, computers are going to be replaced by handheld computers or by phones. And I better get on this fast. And so that was a situation where the tenacity and the grit and the I'm right and the world is wrong would have really hurt me, right? And instead, what we did is we actually created the GrubHub app was like it was in the first 100 apps in the App Store for the Apple App Store. And so that was an accelerant on the business. Like, it was an incredible accelerant on the business to be the only app in the App Store that had online ordering and had 45,000 restaurants backing it. Or at the time, it's probably put closer to 20,000. And so this is the tension, right? Like, I started with the grit, and then but then I had to be agile, and like that's the paradox. And like, there's the graveyard of failed startups where they applied agility when they should have applied tenacity, or they stayed the course when they should have pivoted. Like, that's 98% of failures, and it's like 90% of startups that start. Like, most companies fail because they get this wrong. And here's the thing, like, there's really no data that's going to tell you which, like, it's generally a gut feel. So it might just be luck, actually. But yeah, I mean, it is like why startups, one of the reasons why startups are so hard.
I mean, you mentioned luck, but I'm sure there's a bit more to it. Were there any kind of tactics, methods, principles, tricks, whatever that you use in order to, have that balance work for you at GrubHub and then now even with Fixer?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of techniques that you can apply. Among the ones that are in the highest probability to tell you, whether or not staying the course or pivoting is the right path. One is certainly an obvious one is revenue, right? If you're not making enough money to continue existing, then you have to change something, right? So like there's an element of like you have to be agile enough to figure out what the product market fit is. But there's another piece, which is just talking to customers, understanding what customers want. And so if you have a lot of customers, so I've built 2 consumer businesses now where we're trying to get millions of consumer customers. And so when you have a lot of customers, you have enough data to be able to say, okay, several 100,000 people want this feature, right? And so listening to customers and finding out where they want the product to go, that's really quite valuable. Apple didn't do this, right? Steve Jobs just figured it out and just did it himself. So like I'm not that guy. Like I need to talk to my customers. There are geniuses who just can just know that, but like I wasn't one of those people. And so that's probably the biggest thing I would say is just a customer orientation and really strong feedback loops and lots of conversation about what customers are saying. And even as those things happen, saying, yes, we are going to do some of the things and no, we're not going to, because you can't go after every single feature customers want. Not everything that they say or they want, if all your customers say, I wish this was free, like clearly that's not a path that you can always go down. But they should at least drive thoughtfulness. And so that's probably the biggest thing is just customer orientation. They'll tell you it's particularly hard in enterprise businesses where a very small number of customers drive a lot of revenue, because one of the pitfalls there is if you listen to customers, you might end up just becoming not much more than a custom development shop for a large entity, and that's not a good way to create a startup.
All right. I wanted to ask now some questions about your actual startup journey. So, from what I think you told me before, you went to MIT, you graduated. Was GrubHub your first company that you started right after MIT, or did you do something before?
I worked as a software developer for a couple of years at the parent company for apartments.com. Okay. And so I did a couple of years of it was a lead generation startup. And so I saw a little bit about that business model as a software developer. And because I'm both an entrepreneur and a software developer, so it's like 2 doses of arrogance, right? Like, I was like, I can do this better. I could do this I don't know about apartments and lead generation, but I think there's something with food that could be done here. And so that I was there probably, I think, just under 2 years before I started GrubHub. I started in my apartment. I write code at night, sell restaurants during the day, and I bootstrapped it for 3.5 years before we took our first investment, and we got up to about $1 million run rate in revenue over the first 3.5 years before we took any investment. And I brought a partner on, and then a few other employees as well during that time.
Did your time working at that apartment lead generation company, did that give you some tactics, strategies on what you applied to doing lead generation for GrubHub?
I think that company is a small company. It was sort of a little bit past the startup stage. There's probably 300 employees, but I think it helped me understand how sacrosanct policies are in a large organization and how resistant to change things are simply because they've always been done that way. And so understanding that from especially from an HR perspective, it made me start to think about like, oh, well, there's like a different way to treat people that you could do in a company. And so I started to there were some things that they did poorly that I was like, oh, I think this could be done better. But then there were some things that were done really well, like lead generation and sales and their software development. Like those things were all good, and creating production environments, like their sysops were good. Like I learned a lot about some of those things. Yeah, I mean, I certainly learned a lot. There was something really valuable about being in a corporation for a couple of years, to take what I wanted and to leave behind what I didn't before starting the company.
Okay. And you said you got to $1 million run rate before you took on an investment. Mm-hmm. During that time, were you what was life like for you? Like, were you paying yourself like small
Yeah.
salary? Were you paying yourself any salary? Did you
Yeah,
take on
I
the
had to pay
money?
myself salary because I needed to eat.
Okay.
And so yeah, I the first 2 years I took a salary of about the first year just under 40K, and the second year like 45,000 for that second year. I stopped paying my school loans. I just stopped paying. I just stopped sending the check in. I'm like, well, this is gonna cost me a crap ton of money later, but like whatever, I'm gonna try and do this thing. And so, I was working a lot. I was working a lot of hours, 80 to 90 hours a week. I was doing a lot of like arbitraging my time. Like I would set up like local networks inside small businesses. I'd set up like their Wi-Fi and stuff like that, and get paid a higher rate than I could pay myself. So that if I did this for 5 hours, it'll earn me 35 hours of work on GrubHub. And so I was doing a lot of that, just sort of trying to get cash in wherever I could while I was like getting the business to launch.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married. I was married at the time, and so my wife, and I still am. And my wife would spend some time in India as an attorney, but it was volunteer. So she wasn't. So like we were apart for about a year. So that I actually had time to work on some of this stuff. Yeah, I mean it was a hustle. I don't necessarily think that's. I don't want to glorify the hustle. Like that's not necessarily the way to do things. And then the third year, I got back to a much more reasonable amount of time. I had more employees. Like I had a partner. And then by the fourth year, I was making, not quite what I did as a software developer, but a little bit more. So I could actually, start paying off my school loans, which had accrued penalties and interest at that point. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of hard work, but it was really fun too. Like it's fun to go into a restaurant and be like, are they going to kick me out? Are they going to yell at me? Are they going to sign up? Like, I don't know. We're going to find out. Here's another like adventure day number 38. Like, here we go. And then they would tell me, no, I'm not going to sign up unless you do blank or X or Y or Z. And so then in the evenings, if I got enough of those data points in the evenings, I'd write that software, go back the next day, try and sell them. Mm-hmm. And so the product improved very rapidly as I was having the customers give me the feedback. Yeah, and I learned how to do marketing and like all that stuff at the same time. I mean, I was kind of making it up as I go along, which is typical for entrepreneurs. You don't know the stuff until you do it, and so yeah. But it was intense. It was an intense time in my life for sure.
Oh, I bet. And when did you realize with GrubHub that hey, this company has a lot of potential that I could really go to the moon?
Day 2.
Like, that early?
Yeah. Wrote, after the first sale to the first restaurant that paid me, it was like, so the first restaurant I got the check from the first restaurant, and I think it was a few weeks later that I quit my job and was like, I'm doing this full time. I had that first check was like $140. It wasn't a lot of money. And so, but in my mind, what I was thinking to myself is like, there's this really inefficient system, and there's all these restaurants are doing things like buying ads on benches or putting things in the yellow pages, or like they're looking for ways to acquire customers that are super inefficient and offline, and that entire industry is about to die. And I'm like, well, if it's about to die, maybe I should be the one that kills it. Like, let me be the predator. Like, this is great. I'm gonna do it. And so I had a sense pretty quickly that like I could figure out how to do SEO and figure out how to do SEM and acquire customers and then create a better consumer experience and then deliver those customers to restaurants. I sort of knew a lot of those things were going to happen. And then if you just look at how big the industry is, you're like, okay, well, that's huge. Mm-hmm. That I think it pales in comparison to the business I'm creating now, which is actually going to be, I think, much larger. With this business, it's, so let me talk a little bit about Fixer. So Fixer is an on-demand handy person service with the people who do the work are W-2 employees. And we train them from scratch. And so it sounds like a super costly, not startup-y kind of way to do things. But the reality is that there's a shortage of skilled workers in the United States. And so the Thumbtacks and Angie's Lists and Home Advisors and all those companies of the world, like there just aren't enough people to connect from a lead generation standpoint anymore. And so we said, well, why don't we make more, like why don't we create a gender and racially balanced way for people to enter the trades, and essentially make more tradespeople, not make the humans, but turn more people into tradespeople, and then provide a premium product to consumers where they don't have to pick up the phone, and it's a good experience and it's high quality, and it's creating the impact that we want to in terms of creating this gender and racially inclusive entry path into the trades. But then if you look at the addressable market, it's insanely large, right? Like if you look at what people spend on food, that's one thing. If you look at what people spend on their homes, it's a much bigger number. And so I have the same feeling about this business, that it's going to be very large.
Mm-hmm. I want to definitely talk about Fixer, and I have a bunch of questions for that. Just last question or two on GrubHub I wanted to ask. When you led GrubHub through those financing rounds and all that mergers, acquisitions, and then finally the IPO, was there anything that you felt learned along the way through all those kind of like growth stages, or was it just always one thing after another? You're just kind of like growing the business to a certain point until you left it?
Yeah, I think we took our first financing, and I learned I learned big things at every financing. I took the first financing, and one of the big lessons is it's not my business anymore. It is now a business owned by a group of people, and I need to be okay with that transition, and I need to embrace it. Otherwise, I'm not. I shouldn't have investors, and so there's an element of like, I don't want to be overly concerned about who has control of the business. I need to hold it with with loose hands as I share equity in the business with other people, and I get the cash in return and can grow the business faster. So that was a big lesson. Pretty shortly after that, we started growing extraordinarily fast, and I was able to sell a very small portion of my shares, enough to pay off the school loans that I had incurred all the interest on. And so when I started the company, my goal was I wanted to pay off my school loans. So I hit that goal, and I hit that goal
pretty
like
quickly.
6 years in. It took a little while because I bootstrapped for 4 years, but 6 years in, and then I had to think about what my new goal was, right? And my new goal is like, okay, well, I want to grow this to the point where it's really helping most of the small businesses in the United States. Like I want to make them more likely to be successful if they're with our company than with not. And it was a very restaurant focused goal, and I want the employees of the company to benefit from it financially as well. And I want to get shareholders. So I was very focused on what my goal was, but ultimately it was about, okay, like I got the financial return I said I wanted out of this. Certainly I wouldn't mind more, but what I really want is I want to create a company that's really good for the restaurants. And so for the next 6 years, that was reflected in our customer base. We had no chains. It was all independent restaurants. And we leveled the playing field. Like the KFCs and Domino's and those kind of companies that already did their own, they could build their own online ordering platforms. And we built that for restaurants so they could compete with the big chains. And so that was really satisfying. But then as we went through a merger, a Series D and then a merger, and then we were approaching the IPO, the number of investors who got involved, it diluted that goal. And the goal of the company became, we need to maximize shareholder returns sort of at all costs for the public shareholders. And my goal was still, I want this to be good for restaurants. And so when those two goals diverged, there was really no more place for me at the company. And so that's one of the things I learned, was that like, if you want an impact orientation in your business, you really have to think about that very early, and you have to codify it in the actual structure of the business, and you have to get investors who agree, right? The John Q. Public, the stock market taken, like if you pretend all investors as a whole are a person, that person is a greedy narcissist, and the only thing they care about is making money. They don't care about anything else. If you met that person, you would hate them. And so it's just really something you really got to think about before taking a company public, is that you are now beholden to a jerk. And that jerk only wants money and does not care about the environment or employees or customers. They don't care about any of those things. They just want to make money. And so this is that theme, like be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. And so and so then that's one of the things I learned is just be very intentional about goals, and don't set them too low. Like my initial goal of I wanted to pay off my school loans was too low of a goal. And so when I hit it, I had to reinvent a new one. But if I had started with the goal of I want to make a company that makes restaurants more successful, and that had been enshrined in the company from the very first day, that would have continued. And I don't want to badmouth the company. They do good for restaurants, but they could do better, right? And so and it's frustrating for me to see that they don't. But yeah, I mean that was the lesson that I really learned throughout all of these things. I mean, I learned a bunch of other things as well, but that's probably the one that's probably most valuable to share.
No, thank you, Mike. Last question on GrubHub was, I've been speaking to a few people about when they've been taking their businesses through to IPO. And I wanted to ask you if there was anything that you would want to tell a founder that they should prepare for, whether that's financially, legally, mentally, when they get to that point. A lot of people said that, legally you really have to have all that kind of stuff well figured out and fleshed out. So that was like one thing. Is there anything else that you would want to share?
Yeah. So first of all, I should say I wrote a very long blog post about this. It's like 8,000 words on my website, which is at mikeevans.com. And it was shared in Forbes and a bunch of stuff like that, where I talk about what the IPO process is in detail. And so if anyone's thinking about it, go read the post. There's a lot of detail in there. Because one of the things about the process that you don't know going into it is it's very secretive.
Exactly.
The people involved are so worried about getting sued or pursued by the SEC that's mum's the word. Just don't talk about it. And so that's just one thing to be aware of, that there's sort of a lot of gag orders like on what you can say. And so I wrote stuff in the post like knowing that most people don't. And so please feel free to go check it out. But I think one of the things that I would one of the things just to be fully eyes open about is that investment bankers are really good at their jobs, and the lawyers that they work with are really good at their jobs. And it's a delight to work with them because it's a delight to work with competent people. And so I really enjoyed working with them. It's their like 83rd IPO, and it's your first. And they are not looking out for your interest. They are looking out for their interests and their clients. And so you cannot be better than the investment bankers and the lawyers and everyone involved in the process. It is impossible to be better at the IPO process than the people who are really good at their jobs, who have done it a bunch more times than you. And your interests are not the same. So, it's just something to be aware of. I would not go through an IPO with an investment bank again. I would only do a direct listing because of that. Because a lot of the line goes with investment banks that you want to have a big pop on the first day where you price at one point, and then in the first trade it's much higher. But all that value goes to the clients of the investment banks, and it really should be accrued by the company, not by the investment banks, because there's really no reason to give that uptick to others. There's no point to it, because ultimately 5 weeks down the road, the investment bank's gone, and the stock's just going to trade at what it trades at, regardless of how good or bad your IPO was.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. So when we spoke last time, you mentioned that after you did the GrubHub IPO, you took some time, and you rode your bike across the U.S. What brought you to wanting to do that? Did you just want to have like a clarity?
I was wiped out. I was tired. Well, I guess people don't go on a 5,000-mile bike ride if they're tired. I was mentally tired, not physically. And I wanted to get some perspective, take a step back, think about what I had accomplished, and think about what I wanted to do different next time. And so also I'd always wanted to do like a big hike, like the Appalachian Trail or something like that. It turns out doing it on a bike is way better because the stuff's not on your shoulders. It's on the bike. So like, it's just more comfortable. Plus I saw a lot of the country. And so I saw a lot of the United States. I just loved it. It was everything about it. It was 3 months. And just got to see all these wonderful towns. I met an amazing number of wonderful people. I made friends for a lifetime. And it just gave me some time to take a step back and get some perspective. And it just made me really think long and hard about the next business I was going to create. And so I'm a big proponent and advocate for impact-oriented businesses, because businesses change the world that they exist in, for good or for ill. And by default, it's for ill. Like if you don't think about it, most businesses make the world a worse place, aside from the economic benefit that they create for their shareholders and employees. But if you think about it, it's actually not that hard to create businesses that create environmental, social, or social good, or create benefit in the communities or in their customers. There's a lot of stakeholders in businesses, and so just a little bit of like forethought goes a long way to creating entity that benefits more than just shareholders and employees. And I think that's actually it's actually a moral imperative at this point. And that was the perspective that I gained on the bike ride. And it wasn't new. I'd been thinking about this for years at GrubHub, and I've been trying to influence things towards that path. So, yeah.
So I want to talk about Fixer now. So from what you've mentioned before, I think you've invested, I think you said 100, 150 companies, right? Something like that?
No, not quite that many. It's probably closer to like 50.
50, okay. So you've invested in 50 companies. And so I want to ask, what made you want to really focus in on what Fixer's doing, or in the industry it is, and be a CEO again in this specific company versus the other 50 that you invested in?
Yeah, there's some evidence I was pretty good at creating companies, right? There's at least one data point that I was pretty good at it, right? And I had, like I said, I invested in like 50 companies. There were, I wouldn't say 50, but there was 30 data points that I was not very good as an investor. And so I was like, okay, I'm not making the impact I want to make on the world doing this. So let me take what I'm good at, the skills that I have, the resources, not only the cash I made from the GrubHub IPO, but the relationships I had with the other investors, the relationship I had with former coworkers, all the stuff I learned while running a company. Take all of those things, and how can I take that and make the world a better place if I use those resources? Like that's where it started from. Also, I was trying to get a rain barrel installed for my garden, and I couldn't get anybody to show up. It was just a real pain. And so I'm like, okay, well, there's a real consumer problem here, and I have all these resources. And so I was starting to think like some sort of on-demand construction-based company would be really powerful. And then when I started looking into it, at the time I had really started getting into impact investing, and that was doing a lot better than the non-impact investing I had been doing previously. And the idea behind an impact company is that the value that the business creates for customers and for shareholders is the same thing as the social benefit it creates. And when I realized that the reason that the rain barrel, I couldn't get somebody to show up, is because there aren't people to show up. Like there just aren't enough people in the trades, and there's a big stigma associated with going into it. And then not only is there not people going into the trades, those that do, if they're not white and male, they have a really hard time entering the trades. It's just very hard if you don't have a cousin or an uncle or a grandfather or a dad who introduces you to somebody who can mentor you. If you don't have someone who can introduce you, it's just hard to enter the trades through historical paths. And those paths I just described are by their nature gender and racially exclusive. And so I was like, well, if there aren't enough people, and that's the core problem, and the solution is we want to create an entry path into the trades, well, we could also increase the gender and racial diversity in the trades by creating this really good entry path and creating a really good job, and then charging a premium for that service, because if supply is limited and we have a premium experience, and demand is high, then we can charge a premium for it. Mm-hmm. And so all those things were coming together in my head, and I was like, I'm going for it. I'm gonna do it again. And so started the company. I have a friend, Katie, who was the first fixer, and she can fix anything. And I have 5 other friends, all guys that are startup guys, that couldn't fix anything. And so I texted those 5 and said, I'm open for business. And one of them texted me back and said, hey, come install some shelves. And so that was 40 minutes into the first hour of the business. I'm like, all right, we got revenue. And so like I had to sign up for, what did I sign up for? I think I signed up for a Square account to like charge the credit cards. And it's funny because like when I left GrubHub, we were negotiating with credit card companies for multi-billions, like tens of billions in credit card transactions. And I'm like, I seriously have to start with a Square account again? Like, can I just get the rate I had before? Because it was way better, at scale. And so yes, I signed up for a credit card account, and then very quickly, the business evolved to okay, instead of me just texting my friends, let's set up some SEM and Google and video like marketing accounts, and let's make sure that the platform that we use to connect the customer and our fixers, instead of me just texting from my phone, like let's start setting up communications channels and having a dispatch system and create an app for the fixers, and then figure out a training program and figure out a safety program and like get insurance, and like it started with do the one job, and then it became do 1,000 jobs. Then it became how do we do 10,000 jobs well and safely, and then how do we acquire customers at a reasonable rate to make that profitable? Like that's just been the whole process for creating the company. And in the meantime, it's working. Like we maxed out at one point at 44% of the fixers are women. It's down a little bit because the pandemic adversely affected more women in jobs than men. But it's working. We're creating a gender diverse, racially diverse entry path into the trades, and customers love it. They love that like they can order a handy person through our app. We show up, we do the work, it's well done, it costs a premium, right? It is expensive. But then that cash goes back into hiring the next fixer, right? And training the next person from scratch. And so the process is working. We're in 4 cities now, Chicago, Seattle, Denver, and Dallas. And we'll be in 20 cities in 2 years. I mean, we're sort of on that path again. Literally, it's the exact same playbook that I used with GrubHub.
Mm-hmm. I have a question I wanted to ask you about the industry itself. So you kind of talked about at the beginning that there's been a decline in the trade education sector. Not a lot of people have been going into it, or like if your family member wasn't in trade, then it's hard to kind of go into it that way. Mm-hmm. How are you navigating through that opportunity to reboot essentially the trade education in the US?
Yeah, that by the way is our goal, to reboot trade education in the United States. So I imagine I must have said that to you at some point if you're recording it back to me. Otherwise you have amazing skills in divination to have figured that out. So the path that works for trade education is I asked my uncle, and my uncle showed me how to do things, and he brought me on jobs, and then he paid me a little bit. And there's a couple of features of that path that are really important. One is that you earn while you're on the job. 2, it generally happens young enough that the needs for earning don't involve actually supporting a family, right? So those are 2 of the key things that work about that path. There are challenges to it as well. It's not high throughput. It doesn't scale. It tends to be male oriented. There's some challenges to that path, although it does work really well for the people who go through it. And so when we thought about creating what doesn't work, okay, pay tuition to go to a school for 2 years where you don't earn anything, come out with debt. First of all, you can't even do that if you're already supporting a family. Even if you're doing it on minimum wage, you can't just stop earning, right, to go to school. You can do that with college, and you can take a maximum amount of debt in college because the return on investment supposedly is so high that you can then pay it off over the course of a lifetime. But it doesn't. The ratio of the amount of time you have to take, if you have to take 2 years in a trade school to like then go like. It just doesn't work. And people typically enter trade schools later in life than 18, right? And so they usually have responsibilities, and so they can't, the needs on their income are even higher. And so we just took those facts and we said, well, the training program has to pay people the day that they start. even though they have no skills. We have to start paying them the day that they start. And so we had to set up a mentorship model pretty quickly where we can bring, it turns out that if you're hanging a TV in somebody's house, one person has to really know what they're doing, right? They have to know how to do the drywall. They have to know the electrical. They have to be able to make it look nice. They have to know how to talk to customers. They have to know how to clean things up. The other person has to hold the other end of the TV.
Yeah.
So it's a great job for the first day for a new trainee, right? Because they can observe and they can learn through osmosis very quickly the customer skills, always keeping things clean, being thoughtful about how you organize your tools before a job starts, being friendly to the family dog when you go in somebody's house. Like all those things you pick up pretty quickly that historically someone would have learned from their uncle, right? And so so the big innovation is that we don't start with teaching Ohm's law or what electrical codes are or anything like that. We start with sending trainees as a helper into customers' homes. And then we actually start with the digital curriculum. All the fixers start with an actual digital curriculum the day before they show up. But they can do that in the evenings while they have their old job before the day they start with us, right? So it's not costing them earning time. And so that's the idea is you learn on the job. And then after a few weeks of learning on the job, we take a step back and everybody does classroom and lab time to reinforce and to put structure around what they had already learned. So that's the program we created. It's very flexible and it doesn't cost a ton of money. I mean, it doesn't cost a little bit of money, but we're charging customers for the value that we create while we're training. And so it took 4 years to build this system. It took a lot of work to get this working. But that's the idea behind it. We're trying to take the best parts of traditional trade education and just make them scalable and make them work for all types of people.
And how are you going about finding those tradespeople right now?
Yeah, we advertise just like we would for customers. We do Facebook ads and Craigslist ads, and we put ads on Indeed, and we create videos, and we do influencer marketing, and we do SEO, and we have landing pages that are highly optimized. We just assume we have two sides of a network we have to create. All the things you do on the consumer side, just do them on the supply side as well. Which, by the way, is the same thing that Uber and GrubHub and DoorDash and all those companies do for drivers on their supply side. They just happen to be 1099 workers, and we're hiring W-2.
I noticed one recurring theme in terms of a skill set that you learned when you were a software developer early on that you then applied again in GrubHub.
I can't wait to find out what you've observed. I'm so excited for this.
It's your fixer is like the importance of like an entrepreneur or a founder knowing how to do SEO, SEM well.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's like a pretty important skill trait to know? Or
I think that not necessarily. I think that a founder has to have technical domain skills. Like if you just got an MBA and you're like, I'm going to start a business because I know about business, like it's bullshit. You don't know about those are not the right people to start businesses. I mean, people ask me the question, how do you find a technical co-founder? And I'm like, I don't know. I was the technical co-founder. I just learned the software. And so, but you don't have to necessarily know how to do marketing with SEO, digital marketing, right? Or you don't necessarily have to know how to do software development. You don't necessarily have to know how to do sales or product development or operations or finance or legal. You don't have to know any one of those. You don't have to know every one of those things. You have to know 2 or 3 of them yourself, because there's so little room in a startup for someone who's not pulling their weight. Any one of those skills you can hire somebody to like plug in. But if you have to hire all of them, unless you have some unfair advantage in terms of raising financing, it's just too expensive to hire all those people before you even know whether customers like the idea that you don't even know you have yet. Like it's just too hard. So I think some technical skills are important. And I think the idea that you have to get conversant and learn all of the technical skills so that you can at least, when you set the strategy and you have a VP of marketing telling you what the SEO or SEM strategy is, you have to be able to have a reasonable conversation about it at some level of depth. You don't have to be an expert necessarily, but you have to be able to judge whether or not the strategy that the marketing person is laying out correctly ladders up to the overall strategy for the company and whether they're executing well. at the very least, you have to know that so that you can hire the right person, right?
Exactly.
And know if they're bullshitting you or if like they actually know their job, right? And then over time, you become maybe not just a generalist, but like some depth across a very broad level set of skills. Now, it just so turns out that I was a software developer and I did a lot of the marketing and sales early on, and so I can speak to VPs of technology and marketing and sales in a pretty conversant way. The legal and HR stuff I was never very good at. I mean, I'm good at setting culture, but like the actual like practice of executing HR policy, I have to rely on experts for that completely because it's not my, and nobody should sort of assume that they have to be the expert in everything.
Last couple of questions, Mike. I wanted to ask with Fixer, if I'm not mistaken, you did a Series A, I think, for $5 million. Is that right?
Yeah.
So why raise with Fixer? Why go through the investors again?
Instead of just writing a check.
Yeah.
I didn't want Fixer to be the Mike show. I wanted, from the very start, I wanted it to be an impact-oriented business with a broad base of committed people with skin in the game who cared about what we were trying to accomplish. And eventually the business might need a Series C or a Series D or a Series E. There's some point at which writing the check becomes quite uncomfortable for me. I could have written the $5 million check. More than that starts to feel like a little bit like there's a lot of money to put into one business. Even if I really believe in the business, it makes more sense to stay diversified, right? From a portfolio perspective. So I wanted all those people alongside me because they make the business more likely to succeed. They have ideas, they challenge me, they point out my blind spots. I love board meetings because when an investor tells you something you hadn't thought of, you're like, nice. Like your money was fine, but now you're providing value. Like, this is what I want. And so I encourage every founder to get a board as quickly as possible because they make you more likely to succeed by telling you shit you don't want to hear. And if it's you just don't want them because you don't want to hear it, that doesn't make you a good leader. It means your head's in the sand, right? Yeah. So, and so I wanted all of those things pulling in the same direction. And so as we sort of are now on our path, we'll probably have a fairly large Series B at some point soon. I think. Hopefully, if we continue growing like we're growing, it's just a lot easier to if I was starting from scratch at this point, I'm like, maybe I should put a board together and get some investors. It's like, it's too late. And the business would have failed by now if I didn't have a board. Like, they've definitely coached me to take some turns and some changes and some things like that I wouldn't have seen. And I've done this before. Like, I know what I'm doing, but I have blind spots just like anybody else. I mean, there's been a few times even where the lessons I learned the first time around turned out to be false the second time around. And so because of this, businesses are different, and then it's a different time than it was then. And the board of directors helps point those things out.
Cool. Last question I'll combine into, I'll take two questions, put into one. What would you want to be your final message for the audience? Whether it's something that you wish founders would have asked you but never do.
Yeah, I mean, my final message is the same as my first message, which is have a vision for where you're going personally, and understand how the vision for where you're going personally matches up with the vision for where the company is going, and know how they're related and how they're different, and like from the vision comes a goal, and from the goal comes strategy, from the strategy comes tactics. But like, start with like, where am I going? What am I trying to accomplish for myself? If you want to just be filthy rich, great. Go be really good at being filthy rich. If you want something different than that, just be explicit and thoughtful about what it is. And that's it. That's the message. It's very hard to get somewhere if you don't know where you're going.
I love it. No, it's simple but true. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate your time today and coming on our show. And as always, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and supporting the show. And we'll come back to you soon with another episode of Off the Record. Mike, thanks again. It was a pleasure having you.